I'm waiting. Please come by. I got the guts now to meet your eye. Those guts are killing, but I can't stop now. I gotta connect with you, girl, before I forget how. Please wanna hang around. Hello everyone, my name is Ian Garcia, this is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up-and-coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. And in my humble opinion—
Hang on a
Jesus!
minute.
Dang it, GURRDIE! I'm trying to do a review here!
Ah, can it, you lonely trash bin. You got a lot of nerve trying to corner me out of this one. Every goddamn week I gotta just sit here and listen to you go on and on and on about some trashy legacy sequel or remake or some chintzy indie crap that half the time you tell people isn't worth their time anyway unless they're a socially maladroit movie-pilled sucker like you. And now you have the absolute gall to act like you're going to be reviewing Jurassic World Rebirth and not even ask me to participate? Have you no shame, sir?
Well, GURRDIE, this is something we discuss all the time. You gotta work on your communication skills. I had no idea that you would have such strong opinions.
You had no idea that I would have such strong opinions? Motherfucker, I am a strong opinion. I'm a pint-sized, mushroom cloud-laying bomb of strong opinions, especially when it comes to the representation of my people in popular media.
Your people?
Look, I get that you can be a little slow on the uptake, you long-descended mutant tree sloth, but you must be smoking crack if you think you're going to review a dinosaur movie without handing over the mic to your resident dinosaur.
You're a dinosaur?
Of course I'm a dinosaur, you semi-sentient coil of organs. I mean, sure, I might just be a humble baby Demonosaurus from the late Triassic period that had the misfortune of being separated from its nest and falling into a pit of quicksand that turned out to be the portal to the demon world, otherwise known as the Makai, where I was force-fed the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, thus attaining sentience, before being subjected to 200 million years of experiments and mutilation in which I was shown the boundless dimensions beyond pleasure and pain, only to be thrust back into the 21st century, where I was adopted by a kind-hearted single mom and DIY artist slash vendor slash show promoter from Pemberton, New Jersey, only to then be sold to your thankless ass. And as a dinosaur, I think I have far more relevant things to say about Jurassic World Rebirth than you do. Hell, I have more relevant things to say about Jurassic World Rebirth because, like the Jurassic Park franchise itself, I too know what it feels like to be something primal, innocent, and beautiful, only to slowly suffer over time as avaricious hands contort, corrupt, and pervert me into a thankless, ugly, stupid mockery of what it once was.
Oh, GURRDIE, come on, man. Don't say that. You're not ugly and stupid.
I know that, shithead. I'm being philosophical. Now quit your jaw-jacking and introduce me!
Submitted for your approval, GURRDIE the Daemonosaur.
Thank you kindly. Hello everyone, my name is GURRDIE the Daemonosaur. This is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary, a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up-and-coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. And in my humble opinion, Jurassic World Rebirth sucks. Sucks. This movie sucks, 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 sucks. Sucks, sucks, sucks. Sucks, sucks, sucks. New movie rant. New movie rant. I love the original Jurassic Park. I don't just think it's a great dinosaur movie. I don't just think it's a great movie in general. I mean this truly and completely. I think Jurassic Park is one of the greatest American movies ever made. Adapted from novelist Michael Crichton's best-selling 1990 novel by Crichton and screenwriter David Koepp, directed by Steven Spielberg, and released in the summer of 1997, Jurassic Park was already, of course, a technologically revolutionary film, marshaling both the best in practical effects and animatronics, as well as the then-still novel potential of computer-generated imagery and animation to give worldwide audiences something they had never seen before. A spectacular movie about dinosaurs in which the dinosaurs felt incredibly tactile and real and convincing in a way they had never been before. And all that would have been enough to cement the legacy of Jurassic Park as an important touchstone in popular culture from a purely technical perspective. Except that while, at the time, contemporary critics were liable to write off the film as merely a state-of-the-art spectacle where special effects did all the heavy lifting for an adventure story in which the human characters were far less compelling, were seen as just props to keep the story chugging along from one theme park ride set piece to the next, time has shown that Jurassic Park was severely underrated at the time it was released, in spite of how financially successful it was. That, far from being incidental to the state-of-the-art spectacle, Crichton and Koepp's story gave audiences a just as compelling and intimate story, tightly contrived around a diverse and motivationally complicated ensemble of characters that everybody in the audience could find someone to identify with. This movie about a theme park in which dinosaurs are brought back from extinction only to wreak havoc upon the very people who sought to control them and the audience that they were meant to entertain was not just some pat, cliche allegory for the arrogance of man in the face of nature. As someone who has seen Jurassic Park over and over and over again over the years, I am constantly struck by how many new layers I find in the subtlety of Koepp's writing, the symbolism of Steven Spielberg's direction, the small touches in the performances of the cast, all of which points to a film that is brimming with trenchant, identifiable themes that go beyond the cliches of fantasy films of the past. Jurassic Park is not just another science fiction movie about nature pointing up the folly of man. It's also a movie about family, especially unorthodox family structures, organizing to survive in the midst of times in which very few families actually live up to the wealthy suburban nuclear ideals that, ironically, the theme park of the film is explicitly pandering to. It's also a movie that is very metatextual and self-referential, referring to how in the ascendancy of modern finance capital and the advancement of speculative technology, that unscrupulous or, at the very least, ethically questionable businesses will at once advertise to us the utopian potential of what they are selling us, but all the while writing off and rendering invisible the environmental and human costs that they are actually passing back onto society, both local and global. It's also, though, a movie about how the road to hell is paved with good intentions, that these cataclysms and social disasters brought about by ceding so much autocratic power to the most wealthy in our society are not always borne out by pure cynicism, but rather by idealism, the high romantic frenzy that mystifies us into believing that we can just disregard the potential that it is our very idealistic motives that may lead us to desecrating and hurting the very things we hold so dear. But it is also, on top of all that, the first and arguably the only fiction film truly about dinosaurs. Not just dinosaurs as big, vicious brutes who are vehicles for spectacle, but dinosaurs as characters, as they thrive in the popular imagination. Dinosaurs as romantic archetypes that speak to some indefinable longing in the psyche, and more especially, the psyches of very young people. There had been plenty of movies with dinosaurs and dinosaur movies before Jurassic Park, but there were no movies about dinosaurs. The Lost World and King Kong were themselves revolutionary works of early popular spectacle where Willis O'Brien's stop-motion animation served the same awe-inspiring purpose as CGI when Jurassic Park was made nearly a century later. But they are not movies about dinosaurs. From King Kong to O'Brien's protege Ray Harryhausen's 1 million years BC and the Valley of Gwangi, to numerous also-ran B flicks like The Beast of Hollow Mountain and Dinosaurus and Roger Corman-produced Carnosaur. Dinosaurs are just monsters in the interchangeable vein of so many creature feature beasties. You could make most of these movies about giant bugs, or apes, or even just alien blobs. And aside from the fantasy westerns, and I could make a whole other video about the unique romantic connections between the American Western and why dinosaurs seem to work so well against a Western backdrop, aside from those, in most cases, you could make these movies about literally any other kind of movie monster, and it would make no difference either to the plot or to yourself as an audience. But Jurassic Park is not just a movie with dinosaurs. It is the first, and again, arguably the only movie about dinosaurs. It does not treat dinosaurs as monsters, but as romantic characters that we identify with because, despite the fact that they are so replete in our popular culture, despite the fact that so many children take their first steps into finding some interest in biology and the sciences through dinosaurs, you will never be able to see a dinosaur, present company excluded. You will never be able to watch them, either in captivity or in nature. You will certainly never be able to touch them unless you're lucky enough to get to feel a fossil in a museum installation. That's the closest you're gonna get. Dinosaurs are all around us, and you can go to the museum at any time to see their remains and conjectural illustrations and even animatronics of them. But you will never be able to see them. There is just something so inherently dynamic and beautiful about dinosaurs because they lived for so long as the dominant form of animal life on Earth, because they were so many different kinds of them. But there is also something inherently melancholy and tragic and yearning about what we associate with them. And for so many people, Jurassic Park was and remains the closest they had ever come to not just seeing dinosaurs in action, but perceiving them through the lens of human characters who, themselves, did not see the dinosaurs as monsters, but as beautiful, complicated, and awe-inspiring beings that spoke to something just as indefinable in themselves. And with a movie like that, look, any successive attempt at a franchise is going to come up with diminishing returns, and I'm not about to sit here and tell you that I didn't like the first sequel, The Lost World. I thought it was a fun adventure movie, and sure, Jurassic Park 3 isn't particularly good per se, but this isn't about a series of movies that are forever living in the shadow of something that, because of its own innate qualities as well as a not incidental degree of nostalgia, had no hope of capturing the same magic and can't be judged on their own terms. But once we fast forward to the year 2015 and Universal is attempting their official reboot of the Jurassic Park franchise with Jurassic World, and you've got Chris Pratt riding motorcycles through the jungle with a team of trained velociraptors to help him fight a genetically engineered new dinosaur, you have to take a step back and ask yourself, is this even a movie about dinosaurs? So much time has passed. We as audiences have learned to take for granted so many things that were once game-changing, and so much has accelerated and homogenized in terms of just how these blockbusters are themselves almost genetically engineered to target a lowest common denominator of both child and adult audiences to view these big-budget, CGI-heavy fantasy adventure action films as not just special events, but literally the primary pop culture diet at the movies. That it no longer becomes a question about whether an individual Jurassic Park sequel will capture even some of the magic of the original film. It's a question of, what exactly is in this film that reinforces to us as an audience that the people making it even care about dinosaurs? And not just the Jurassic Park franchise as its own corral of superficial content and intellectual property that, again, just like with the B dinosaur flicks of the baby boomer generation, you could interchange these monsters with almost anything and the results would be exactly the same. I didn't hate the first Jurassic World, but it was boring. It was stupid. It wasn't just that I'd seen big CGI dinosaurs ad nauseum for the better part of a decade at that point. It was that it wasn't a movie that seemed to endeavor to make anything special out of its concept, to compel me as an audience towards the idea that dinosaurs, my very own kin, are something more than theme park monsters that are completely interchangeable with, like, Thanos. So I didn't even bother to see the next two Jurassic World movies because I had no reason to believe that the people behind it had any particular respect or admiration for what they were doing. But what should so happen but I should catch wind of another Jurassic World being released in the summer of 2025 that not only features an original screenplay by David Koepp, the primary screenwriter of the original Jurassic Park, but is also directed by none other than Gareth Edwards, who, while his own career as a director has certainly had its ups and its downs, comes to this project with the pedigree of having jump-started his career with the creation of the fantastic indie sci-fi flick Monsters, which he then followed up by being attached to direct the 2014 Legendary Pictures Godzilla film, which, while certainly not perfect, is exactly the sort of movie that, in the context of our bloated, homogenized, CGI spectacle monoculture, that is exactly the sort of movie that you should be looking at if you want to get a director who can bring to a Jurassic Park movie the sense of not only a unique vision, but also a sense of genuine awe and wonder and yearning for dinosaurs, not just as theme park monsters, but as characters who the film should be about in all their strange, fantastic glory. And then I saw the movie. The story of Jurassic World Rebirth is pretty basic, in keeping with the desire of its producers, particularly executive producer Steven Spielberg himself, to respond to the broadly negative reactions to the last Jurassic World movie, with a project that took the franchise back to the very foundations, while still adjusting to the expanded world that the Jurassic World trilogy established. Taking place some years after the events of the last film, Rebirth is framed in the context of a setting in which dinosaurs briefly lived alongside humans all over the globe, only for many of them to rapidly die out because much of the world's climate is not suited to their survival. Hence, the remaining dinosaurs that are alive are either kept in a declining state of captivity. One of the best scenes in the film comes early on when we see a sick, dying brachiosaur collapsed and tied up under some streetlights after having escaped from the Brooklyn Zoo, whereas most of these dinosaurs still thrive on equatorial islands that are strictly enforced no-travel zones to people. Scarlett Johansson stars as Zora Bennett, an ex-military covert operative and current mercenary who is recruited by a shady pharmaceuticals company to lead a mission to one of these islands where, alongside paleontologist and failing museum curator Dr. Henry Loomis— Are you kidding me? Are you f***ing kidding me? Henry Loomis? Dr. Loomis. Why is the name of your nerdy, idealistic paleontologist character in a Jurassic Park movie a reference to the crashed-out psychiatrist of the Halloween franchise? And that's not even the first insane, out-of-pocket Easter egg reference to come out of this movie. No, the first one also happens to be the most insane one, when the pharmaceutical executive played by Rupert Friend tells Johansson's character that he was referred to her by a former Blackwater operative and colleague whose name is Paolo Pasolini. Yes, that's right. Within the first 5 minutes of the 7th Jurassic Park movie, writer David Koepp decided this would be a great spot to give a nod to, of all people, the Italian communist art house filmmaker Pier Paolo Pasolini. Now, this is obviously only the sort of thing that I would catch. Nobody in the general audience is going to know that some off-screen character mentioned in Jurassic World Rebirth shares a name with the writer and director behind the notorious Salo or the 120 Days of Sodom, but it's the sort of thing that I'm going to catch and instantly a fuse is going to short circuit in my head while I'm still just trying to get into this movie. And instead of just being able to settle into the bare minimum establishing details of the plot, I'm instead wondering, is David Koepp f***ing with me? Because why would you do that? Why would you reference one of the most controversial international art house filmmakers who, incidentally, in the late 70s, was murdered in a homophobic hate crime, on your way to this story about a covert team carrying out an illegal mission to extract blood samples from dinosaurs so that it can be used for heart disease treatments? Sorry, did I not explain that part yet? Really, I truly am sorry. I was just distracted. Dumbfounded even by the distinct stench I'm catching a whiff of that the creative team behind this movie are either being too smart for their own good when they should just be worrying about tightening up their story, or they are actively sneaking in Easter eggs like this, almost like a camouflaged middle finger to the audience. Almost like, far from taking this franchise back to its elemental basics, there is this nestled disdain for the project in the first place, and the audience by extension. Again, though, I know that's not going to mean a whole lot to the average person, but what should mean a whole lot to the average person is that, just as we're starting things off, the writing and acting in Jurassic World Rebirth is utter crap. First of all, you know how I just explained the whole idea that while dinosaurs lived briefly alongside humans, now they can only be found on islands around the equator? Pretty simple to convey, right? Well, Rebirth does get that out of the way pretty easily. It uses some opening title chyrons to explain that before jumping into the story. Except that in the scene between the pharmaceutical executive and Johansson's character, they explain it yet again. And then, when we are being introduced to the paleontologist, played by Jonathan Bailey, it's explained again through an animated installation at the museum. That's 3 separate explanations of exactly the same expository information in just the first 15 minutes of this movie. Somebody is asleep at the wheel. It boggles my mind that between Koepp finalizing his final draft of the screenplay and Gareth Edwards executing it, that nobody stepped in to ask, aren't we getting a little redundant here? But then I also have to take a step back and ask myself if this isn't endemic of a phenomenon which we already know has been normalized throughout the mainstream film industry, as more people are opting to simply subscribe to bundle streaming services and watch movies at home, which is this idea of screen time, this anticipation that the people watching your movie are not really going to be even watching your movie, but will either be putting it on in the background or watching it with the volume turned down and the subtitles on, or simply staring at their phone every 10 minutes, so that the anticipation is that you need to hammer home even the most basic expository information, not only as didactically as possible, but over and over again, because you are assuming that the people watching your movie are not even really paying attention to it. Well, you know what? I actually did show up to the theater to see this. I actually don't have a phone. They're way too big for me. And even if I did have one, I would turn it off before the movie starts because I don't want to be interrupted. I want to watch the movie that I paid good money to see. And so for the price of admission, for the effort I made to leave this little shelf and crawl all the way to the theater and show that I actually cared enough to see this movie, I get to be treated like a idiot with no attention span who can't even be expected to wrap his head around the idea as simple as, yeah, this movie called Jurassic World, there's going to be an island in it with dinosaurs on it. Because that's what it basically boils down to. You could throw out every last shred of detail from the previous Jurassic World movies, and it wouldn't make the slightest bit of difference. And the reason I already know it wouldn't make the slightest bit of difference is that even before the Jurassic World movies, we already had 2 previous Jurassic Park sequels that literally have the exact same premise. There are equatorial islands with living dinosaurs on them. Those islands are strictly quarantined from human interference, and then a bunch of people decide to break the rules and go anyway for whatever MacGuffin reason. Again, this isn't just a problem with the Jurassic Park franchise, it's increasingly a problem of mainstream cinema and popular franchises writ large, where the expository materials that they are starting out with have gotten so convoluted that even when the filmmakers themselves are ostensibly trying to bring things back to basics, to do something stripped down, to make a stand-alone project where you don't have to have seen, let alone liked the 3 previous films in order to see it, they still end up taking the longest, most plodding, boring route from point A to point B because it's almost like they've literally forgotten how to just tell a story, especially to just tell a story as if they expected the audience to actually be paying attention to it. But then again, how am I as an audience even supposed to find a way to paying attention if what I'm given to work with is not only so redundant, but so boring on its own terms at that? First and foremost, it is so utterly inane to me that just like with virtually every other fantasy franchise, the protagonists of Rebirth are 1, an elite mercenary, 2, a failing museum curator, and 3, a former colleague of Johansson's character who is an arms trafficker, played by Mahershala Ali, whose boat is used to get the team to the island. Which is to say, of all 3 of these primary characters with whom we spend about the first half hour of the picture, with 2 out of 3 of them, they do not have a job or a career or are characters at all that are even remotely identifiable to a regular person. Even with the museum curator played by Bailey, the individual who has the most overt love for dinosaurs, the person who, the only reason he's convinced to go on this mission is because the shady pharmaceutical developer is able to exploit his dream of seeing dinosaurs up close. David Koepp, as a screenwriter, has so far lost the plot of what made his original adaptation of Crichton's novel and screenplay so magnetic that all he can figure out to do with this character is use him as a mouthpiece for scientific minutia, or, at best, to give some doomsaying speech about the arrogance of man in the face of nature, blah blah blah. But there's no dramatic credibility to him, and just like with Johansson's mercenary and Ali's trafficker, they don't actually have a dramatic role in the story. They are characters defined entirely by their function in the mission, in the most mechanical sense. And that especially becomes a big problem because even for how poorly these characters are written, there's an entire embarrassing sequence in which Johansson and Ali's characters attempt to finesse the pharmaceutical executive out of more money, and I dare anybody who isn't staring at their phones to make heads or tails of what even the purpose of that scene was. Even for how poorly they are written, even for how inevitably wooden Johansson and Ali come across, especially in the most contrived and forced scene where they are alone together on the ship and basically just spew out whatever their core trauma as characters is, which is, again, doesn't modify their roles on the mission at all, doesn't give them anything to do in the story at a dramatic level. Even for all of that, you are in a really, really bad place with your dinosaur movie when even the one character you have who is supposed to be like the dinosaur guy, when even he can't even manage to convince you that he gives a about dinosaurs? You know who gives a about dinosaurs? Well, besides me, a dinosaur. You know who really gives a about dinosaurs besides me? Dinosaur people. You know who dinosaur people are? Well, the original film spelled it out for you, everybody. Dinosaur people are not special forces or covert operators. They aren't pirates and traffickers. They aren't motorcycle-riding surf bros. They're nerdy, eccentric people like Doctors Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler and Ian Malcolm. They're regular people who are defined by their eccentricities and desires and failings and passions as characters steeped in a world of investigation and intellectual obsession that, sure, most regular people might be able to wrap their head around about as well as somebody who is a f***ing mercenary, but I reckon you can wrap your head around a lot more once you see how elated these three absolute nerds are just to see dinosaurs. It's those sorts of characters who are compelling and end up carrying a dramatic story because they are primarily defined by their passion for life. And that inimitable way that dinosaurs can speak to those passions. So we get to go from their ecstatic faces at seeing this thing that staggers the imagination to, like good intellectuals, questioning their initial feelings, to finally having to marshal every last ounce of their human will in a desperate gamble to save their lives and the lives of the innocent. You're not going to be able to capture the same lightning in a bottle again. But you can maybe at least take a lesson from two things. One, back in the day, it used to be that most adults, even in fantasy, adventure, and action films like the original Jurassic Park, they weren't action heroes. Those characters already had their own place in popular culture, their own ken in a media ecosystem. But family fantasy adventure films used to far more often be about regular people, and very often regular, if eccentric, adults, with adult problems and adult concerns and adult ways of seeing the world that also directly informed the story and weren't just backstory that they spouted out in a vain shoehorned attempt to get us to give a shit about them, even though they don't give a shit about the very thing that we're supposed to give a shit about to put our ass in the seats to see this dinosaur movie. 2. By virtue of that, those family fantasy adventure movies did a better job of catering to everybody of every age, because everybody had something in the drama that they could latch onto at their age, and all of it was held together by the glue of that central romantic fascination with whatever the spectacle was. In other words, with the original Jurassic Park, and even to a certain extent with the next two movies, if you were a kid, you would get the far-flung fantasy adventure with your favorite kinds of prehistoric animals. And if you were an adult, you were gonna get a story that was primarily about adult characters who did things like Ellie Sattler joking to Alan Grant about how bad he is with kids, or Ian Malcolm flirting with Ellie Sattler before he even has the stones to ask Alan Grant if they're already in a relationship so he can make a move on her. The dude is trying to get laid on the dinosaur island. And then you get all of these characters into a room where they have a deep intellectual discussion.
I really hate to interrupt here because, damn, GURRDIE's really on a roll, but as someone who was born in 1991, who was only 6 years old when the original Jurassic Park came out and saw it, like GURRDIE, over and over again on home video, it really is so hard for me to convey to even just people who were born 10 years after I was, and now the generation born 20 years after me. It is both so hard to convey and honestly so dispiriting to admit that the younger you are, the less you have in terms of family-oriented popular films like we had when I was a kid, where there may have been child characters and child protagonists even, but for the most part, even the most high-concept fantasy films, even in ones that were, as I got older, I was ready to admit were even quite vapid and stupid, even in them, there was still this orientation in the dramatic writing of these films to be about adults. And not just adults, but adult characters who weren't superheroes, who weren't special operators, who weren't, as GURRDIE alluded to, motorcycle-riding velociraptor whisperers. They were, by and large, just regular, if heightened and eccentric people. It wasn't just that everybody in the audience had something they could latch onto wherever they were in terms of their age. It was that the characters and the heroes we saw in films when I was growing up tended to be adults who modeled a more realistic sense of what adulthood actually looked like. A movie like Jurassic Park didn't just make you want to see more Jurassic Park movies. They made you want to be like Dr. Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler and Ian Malcolm. They made you want to grow up to be these sorts of exciting, eccentric, passionate, and oftentimes really emotionally mature and even intellectual people. My heroes when I was growing up, my heroes in movies were not heroes because they had fantastic powers or technology. They weren't my heroes because they were perfect physical specimens of Hollywood fitness. They weren't all action heroes. They were my heroes because they made being an adult, a regular adult, seem like something to be envied and anticipated and something you strive to be. That passion they had, that intimacy they shared, that you may not have understood it as a kid, but as I got older, I increasingly began to appreciate how important that was as a teaching tool in terms of showing me what being a grown-up was actually like and what it entailed, as opposed to now when
even a movie where you have two people as physically fit and beautiful as Scarlett Johansson and Mahershala Ali in this attempt at a scene of emotional intimacy where the former talks about one of her teammates being killed by an IED in Yemen and the latter talks about his divorce following the death of his son. These characters never even get within 7 feet of each other. It's almost as if the entire scene has been shot like a lot of scenes are shot in movies like this nowadays, where actors aren't even allowed to get too physically intimate with each other because you might have to do last-minute reshoots and green screen one of them in differently. The world of Jurassic World Rebirth is one that is so antiseptic that even one of the most basic facets of adulthood, which is like, that mature feeling of needing both emotional and physical intimacy from another consenting adult, can't even be broached as if in pathological fear of upsetting somebody. And let's just put the cards on the table. They don't have the balls to have Scarlett Johansson be flirted with by the paleontologist white guy, but at the end of the movie, get into a real relationship with Mahershala Ali's character. Let's just put it out there. It's because he's black and she's white. That's why we can't have intimacy between them. That's why we have to have this forced scene that has nothing to do with the plot, distracts us completely from any sense of dramatic motivation for the characters in the story, has nothing to do with anything, and we don't even get to see two hot people really flirt with each other in a way that these two actors are clearly trying to do with each other, and you can see just in the way they look at each other, they are trying to be flirty, but they can't get too close because she's white and he's black, and they're afraid it will upset somebody. And so here's where I reveal that more than a half hour into this over 2-hour movie, we finally introduce some regular people. The parallel story of a divorced dad played by Manuel Garcia Rulfo, taking his 2 daughters played by Luna Blaze and Audrina Miranda, as well as the eldest daughter's annoying, lazy boyfriend played by David Iacono, on a boating trip before they are capsized by a dinosaur attack, are rescued by the crew of the secret mission, and are reluctantly brought along on a disastrous journey to the island of the dinosaurs. It cannot be stressed enough how, for every false note, for every mind-bogglingly stupid bit of dialogue prose, for every botched attempt at generating some dramatic interest out of Johansson and Ali and Bailey's characters, the ensemble work between Garcia Rulfo, Blaze, Iacono, and Miranda almost makes up for it. It's here that you're almost shocked by how good Kep's dramatic writing can be because of just how mature and intimate and defined it feels in contrast to the parade of wooden planks that counterbalances it. It's here that you actually see Gareth Edwards as a director, managing to inject some life into what otherwise ends up feeling like a fanboy assignment for him, where he's just happy to be along for the ride and not like he has so little actual creative control on this project that he couldn't even convince the producers to let him cut out 5 minutes so this thing wouldn't drag on for over 2 goddamn hours. It's here that you see not the great film, but the tolerably good film that Jurassic World Rebirth could have been if they focused more on these regular characters, the exact sorts of people whose dramatic conflicts and experiences would best complement a story about being flung into the heart of carnage and darkness, where everybody has to marshal together not just their strength, but their virtues in order to survive, which of course then begs the question, why the wasn't this movie about them from the beginning? Why the am I seeing this story about the dinosaur island from the beginning primarily through the eyes of the exact sorts of characters in the ensemble who not only don't give a about dinosaurs, but are the least likely to have any special dramatic attachment to what's going on? Everybody else in the movie, the characters who the movie primarily follows, they're all being paid good money to be there. It's literally just a job for them. That's not a dramatic role. You know who the dramatic role is held with? Oh, I don't know. Maybe by the estranged family characters? Why am I viewing the opening tragic sequence of the movie, where the dying brachiosaur causes a traffic jam? Why am I viewing that through the eyes of a cynical pharmaceuticals company money man, and not, say, through the eyes of a child? Like through the eyes of a little girl like Miranda's young character, as she and her older sister are being driven by their mom over to see their dad for one last summer boat trip. There's a version of this story where there is at least some sense of atmosphere or mystique in which we at least primarily follow this family up and to the point where they are rescued by this team of cynical blood pirates who are just out for money. Instead, we literally have, in the first 15 minutes of the film, the main ensemble explaining to us multiple times exactly what the plot is and what is going to happen. Why am I viewing the story through the eyes of its most jaded and least interesting, least relatable characters? Why am I viewing this story through a lens in which it's taken for granted that there's not even any point in suspending our disbelief in the mystery of Jurassic World, in discovering it over time and heightening our sense of tension and interest through the eyes of these regular people? Obviously, I haven't even gotten into the part where we acknowledge that this movie carries on with the worst idea of the Jurassic World trilogy, which is the whole idea about the scientists attempting to transgenetically crossbreed new dinosaurs, but let's be honest, Jurassic World Rebirth is too poorly written of a film to even make the downward descent into the real heart of sci-fi horror darkness work. But in one of David Koepp's further great attempts at being too smart for his own goddamn good, we do have a scene once the secret team is marooned on the island where the pharmaceutical guy explains, "Oh, yeah, there are also a lot of abandoned mutant dinosaurs here." And so someone asks him, why did the company make mutant dinosaurs? And the answer is, well, people get tired of seeing the same things over and over again. But the new dinosaurs were too erratic and difficult to control, so the idea was abandoned. Which then begs the question from the film's characters. So if these animals were so dangerous, why didn't the company just kill them off and start over? To which the answer is, well, the company already spent hundreds of millions of dollars making them, so it's really just best to let it ride and see what happens. That's right. In the middle of Jurassic World Rebirth, we get one of these now so tiresome and grating metatextual moments in which the film acknowledges to the audience
There's a bunch of dumb bullshit in this movie that we're basically tied to trying to redeem just because of the sunken cost fallacy. And suddenly it's brought into such stark relief why I don't even need to ask myself why David Koepp decided to make one random reference to Pier Paolo Pasolini in the opening of Jurassic World 4 or Jurassic Park 7, whatever you want to call it. That one scene itself speaks to a level of disdain for the audience that goes above and beyond merely the ego of a creator who thinks he's above what he's writing. Because not even I think that. I think the situation is far worse. I think Koepp doesn't think he's above trying to make a diamond out of this turd of a project that he's saddled with, but that there's just such an elemental degree of being totally jaded and thankless and still somehow self-satisfied with the creative complacency and lack of even basic dramatic leadership that defines so much of mainstream commercial filmmaking right now, that it just can't help but betray the obsequious degree to which even filmmakers working with the best of intentions, not unlike John Hammond of the original Jurassic Park, can't even really pretend, not so much that they think this sort of project isn't beneath their standards, but that they don't even necessarily believe in standards in the first place anymore. That more and more filmmakers are getting so confident in telling you, the audience, the shaved, tailless gibbons that keep going to see this crap no matter how many times you get disappointed or underwhelmed. They are getting so much more confident just telling you straight to your face that all you get is crap, that crap is now the height of popular movie making, that infinitely self-referential crap that doesn't even believe in itself is all you should aspire to see. I am not about to pretend that the original Jurassic Park doesn't have its own cheeky sense of humor, its own self-aware and metatextual qualities, but something went fundamentally wrong with Jurassic Park 3, which, while not a bad family fantasy adventure movie per se, was the first Jurassic Park film to say the quiet part out loud, when, early on in the film, at a conference that Dr. Alan Grant is giving, he's asked, "What is the point of paleontology in a world where dinosaurs are alive again?" And Dr. Alan Grant says that the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park are not dinosaurs. He says, "What John Hammond and InGen did was create theme park monsters, no more and no less." But here's the thing about Jurassic Park 3. The whole dramatic arc of that movie, through Alan Grant as a cipher, is about him learning to make peace with the fact that he has to overcome his trauma, get past his complacency, and embrace the fact that, whether he likes what John Hammond did or not, dinosaurs are alive now. The dinosaurs of Jurassic Park are not just theme park monsters. They are dinosaurs, worthy of his intellectual curiosity, his romantic fascination, and his respect as living creatures that speak to something indefinable within him, just as they do to us. The Jurassic World movies, made largely by fanboys who were way too smart for their own good, completely f***ed it up. They ate the slop and decided that because the Jurassic Park movies weren't really about dinosaurs in the most pedantic sense, that it didn't matter anymore whether or not those movies were about dinosaurs. Because it was just decided, and not even from on high, but by the very filmmakers making their pitches and being vetted as the biggest possible fans of the previous films and the heirs to their legacy, which Gareth Edwards now unfortunately included among them, that these really were just movies about indiscriminate, homogenized theme park monsters. No more and no less. Well, screw that! I'm not asking for another masterpiece of American filmmaking like the original film. All I'm asking for is a tolerable, dramatically tight, character-focused family fantasy adventure movie about dinosaurs. Wow. Wow, that was honestly really well said there, Gertie. I know you're not one for ratings, but I think it'd be fair, given that you did like a lot of the stuff with the family in this movie as much as I did, which was relatively well written, well performed, well directed. It can't make up for everything else, but I think that warrants, at the very least, saddling this otherwise disaster of a movie with a 2.5 out of 5.
Yeah, that'd about sum it up for me, too. And for as much as I hated that Drek, I had a lot of fun getting to talk about it. You want to bring me on the mic a little more, and who knows, maybe I can even get in some cameos for my two homies over here. What's up, dolls?
Well, Gertie, neither of those two are alive. Those are just plushies.
You mean I did all this hard work and I was just talking to myself this whole goddamn time?
Yeah, Gertie, I know the feeling. Anyway, I think I'll take back the mic to thank all of you out there for sticking through another really long rant review, and don't be a stranger to sounding off in the comments. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Otherwise, please share, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Gurrdie the Daemonosaur, and this was the new movie diary. We're going to catch you guys next time.